Recording in progress.
That would be helpful.
Okay, it's 7:30, so just to be on time, we're gonna get started. So, everyone have a good dinner?
Yes.
You like the food?
Yes.
You know, I had to go 2 rounds just to get all the food in because the first one they go like, oh, my plate's already full. So the second round, that's when you get all the good stuff. And then, of course, the dessert. Oh my goodness. Um, so I hope everyone enjoy, and hopefully you don't fall asleep now. Difficulty is how you're going to pull out the question. So I'm going to kick it off with, I guess, being me over here brought up one, or maybe I let him start. No? From the man himself.
Okay.
Okay, so while you're looking at that, we start with a simple one, I guess.
Yes.
So earlier this morning, Pablo was going over the material, and there was a number in there with 12, and then 12 multiplied by 30, and we end up with the year 360. The question is, where did the 30 come from? And what's the significance of the 30?
So in the stanzas, as we saw, the numbers are 7, and then there are the second 7, and then it goes to uses the Sanskrit word tridasa, which means 30. But then in the explanations, HPV adds also some other hierarchies. She talks about the 12 orders of celestial beings. And she says that 5 of those orders are gone working on higher planes. They have already finished whatever they were doing for our system. So, but it seems that the numbers you have 1, 2, 3, these are the 3 logoi. Then the third logos interacts with cosmic matter or substance, which is the 4th element. And this is the tetractys, Blavatsky calls it. Tetractys is a Greek word that Pythagoras used to talk about this perfect number. So Blavatsky says these 4 elements are the tetractys. Tetra is 4, from which the whole manifestation arises. So then you saw in one of the stanzas says the 4 takes to itself 3, and we have the 7. So 7, we have from the 4, we have the 7, that is the first hierarchy. And then comes the 12 orders of celestial beings, of which only 7 are active. So that's like the second 7, or second hierarchy of 7. And then from there we have the multitudes that are represented in the number 30. So the number 30 seems to be kind of random, but if you multiply 12 by 30, you get 360. That is the circle, that is the complete, field of evolution. You have in astrology, you have the 12 signs, and within each of the signs there are 30 degrees, and that's how you get the 360 degrees in a chart. So maybe that can be one of the correlations. As I said, I haven't worked a lot on the numerology of the stanzas, but that's how one thing that I think could, why the stanza says 30 as opposed to any other number. But I don't know. Yes, Dos, if you have any ideas about,
Not
that
really,
30.
except I know that in the Hindu tradition, they talk about 30. In the Hindu thing, as far as I know, they use that a lot, like there's 30 million or billion or some kind of number of how many gods there are. So
Yeah, that's true.
It's not a new thing with
Yeah.
I would say anybody gets a chance, he mentions the 12 creative hierarchies. Is an old book by Annie Besant called The Pedigree of Man. If you ever run across that, she goes into great details about this 5 liberated classes and the 7 that are active. It's definitely worth reading. But you can do numbers so many different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, that
it's
is
a lot
true.
of fun, but there's nobody's got the title. And when they asked her, she was, oh, why are you asking that?
Yeah.
What is it to you anyway?
Yeah.
So,
That's very interesting to read the dialogues, because after The Secret Doctrine was published, she held a series of meetings with the people of the Blavatsky Lodge, and those manuscript notes that were taken at the time were published a few years ago, and you can see there how Blavatsky interacted with people. And when the questions were fine like that, she would say something like what Doug says. What is it to you? What do you care? Just go to bed, she says to one guy, But it's true. In one part of her commentaries, she mentions that in India there is the idea of the 33 crores of gods. A crore is, I think, I don't know, is there anybody here?
10 million.
10 million. So 33 plus 10 million would be 330 million gods. That she says somewhere else also that is supposed to be how many atoms we have in the body, probably symbolically speaking. So there is something in the name, in the number 30 or around that. But yes, HPV didn't explain the details of it.
if you ever get a chance to read those dialogues, they're just wonderful.
They are.
Because you get a feeling for what it was like to have as a teacher and the way that she would respond, and so many little hints that she gave. And the number thing is something, it's obviously very important. The number one reference book in the Secret Doctrine is Skinner's book called The Source of Measures. It has to do with all this numerology. So there's something there that, she had a very interesting, if you follow TSA, there's a magazine called TSA History. And if you follow that at all, there's a very interesting correspondence between Blavatsky and this guy Skinner, who did all the mathematical stuff. And there's a famous thing, they call it the Christmas letter that she wrote to her. And that's going to be published apparently in the last issue of the Scientific History. It's got some very interesting things, and she talks about the digits of pi and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's apparently very important.
It is.
I think a lot like Hartman said in the thing you mentioned yesterday, this is the Bible for the next millennium. Mm-hmm. So it's it'd be a long time before we understand all of the things that she's given us.
And of course, when she wrote The Secret Doctrine, she said that she didn't have much hope of the Secret Doctrine being understood until the end of the 20th century. She said in 100 years. And with the advance of science and the advance in comparative traditions, etc., we can understand the Secret Doctrine in a very different way than it was possible at the time. So it's possible that in a few hundred years, all this will be far more clear. And yes, and in the dialogues, it's interesting to see how she kept saying, "You are all so literal," because they would ask questions, and you can see that her way of looking at this was different, was just different, because you see the question and you say that's a perfectly, reasonable question. And for HPV, this was just too literal. You cannot see beyond what this is trying to tell you. It's very interesting. Read the dialogues if you are interested in this book. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, when she traveled, and I read Countess Wachtmeister's book years ago, she happened to mention that she had one good-sized valise. Okay, a valise is not a trunk, it's a suitcase. And yet she wrote The Secret Doctrine. What books did she actually physically have in her possession during the time of The Secret Doctrine?
Yeah. Well, in Adyar, there is a small collection of books that was part of her library. But so she had been writing The Secret Doctrine for several years. That at the beginning they thought to publish one chapter in the Theosophist every month, and then at the end publish it as a book. But then she couldn't do that, and she wrote an original manuscript. But then she sent it to Adyar and for Subarao to help. Subarao said, "This is a mess. I can't work with this," so she started over. But so this was extended for a long period of time. But the bulk of the work was done after she left Adyar, and she was in Europe in a couple of years or so. And during that time, I don't think that she even brought the books that she had, that they are in Adyar now. So people around her says that she had only a handful of books. And they said that HPV would tell them, go and check this reference to the British Library. At this time she was in England. Go check this reference here or there. And they said many of those references were really tough to find, and the book was tough to find. Some of the books were in the rare manuscripts that HPV didn't have any of that. But they said, always they found the reference, just like HPV was saying. So if you see how she described that she wrote Isis Unveiled, she said that she was seeing all these things. So she was on the astral plane or the Akashic records or whatever we call them. She was seeing and she was copying all these quotes, and then she would ask people to go find the actual book to see if what she saw was correct. So she didn't have many books around her at all, but it was more accessed by occult means.
Several years ago, Maria led us in a year's study of the book Interstellar. You're familiar with the movie.
With the movie. Yeah.
And so we had a resident scientist, and we learned about black holes, and it's talked about in that book. Even though earlier you and Maria and Alfredo said that energy is leaking from a black hole, when I'm going over the different propositions that you gave, this is a description. Number 2, time was not. The illusion of past, present, and future lay asleep in the infinite bosom of timeless duration. That is a poetic way of describing what is a black hole. Now, I'm not a scientist. Please comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, what you have there is my paraphrase version. So if you are going to quote or you study, go to the original. Yeah. Blavatsky says, it's shorter in Blavatsky's version. She says, time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. That's what she says. So I, added some In the book, we have also the original stanzas. Now, I don't know if I would connect the black holes to the principle of time in particular. I mean, yes, the whole state described in the first stanza seems to be where there is no differentiation. Uh, so if the Laya centers that the secret doctrine talks about are connected to that state in the first stanza, which I think very easily can be connected to that, then the Laya center can be understood by the descriptions in the first stanza. So that's the first step. The second step is if the black holes in science are the Laya centers, because science is not even sure what the black holes are. So this is a lot of speculation. But if what science says is more or less correct, and we can compare them with the Laya centers, then yes, the first stanza could be used to have a sense of what happens in a black hole, in a certain sense. I know you brought up the movie because they play with time there.
And it was written by a Caltech physicist.
Yeah. So in Elia Center, we can speculate that space and time, as we understand it, breaks down, which is what seems to happen in a black hole. So there could be a correlation there, but we have always to be careful because there is a lot of speculation here. I think we are called to speculate on these things, but always keep in mind this is kind of wild speculations on our part. They may be right, but
No one else?
yeah, I think he has some there, but let us
Okay,
finish.
just one curious question. So much is relevant today with our high-tech science. How much science was known in Blavatsky's time that she could speculate on these points that are very pointed and allude to what they only have recently discovered?
Yeah, well, in the third part of the secret doctrine, each volume has three parts. The first one is the stanzas, the second is about the symbols connected to whatever she explained in the stanzas, and the third part, she contrasts modern science of the time with the secret doctrine. So you can see there clearly what science thought about all these subjects, or at least what HPV was aware that science said about these subjects. Maybe scientists knew some more of this, but HPV was not aware of that. So when she wrote The Secret Doctrine, if you want to know how much she knew about science, then in the third part you can see what she knew about science. Of course, science at the time was far more amateur in the sense that it wasn't highly organized as it is today. Einstein was not a scientist. He worked at a patent shop or something, and many of the discoveries by scientists, they were made at home. The science was still more amateur. So Blavatsky quotes a lot of supposed to be scientists in the secret doctrine that were saying things that coincide with the secret doctrine, which they are not famous scientists at all. And what they said, if that was accepted at the time, is not accepted today. So, the references that she gives in connection to science are all dated. But if your question is how much she knew and what was science saying at the time, the third part is perfect. And she compares and she says, no, this is not, this is okay, this is not. But in the 150 years or so that have passed, or 125, let's say, that have passed since the secret doctrine, a lot of the things there, I think science has come to agree with the secret doctrine.
Okay, the question from T is, evolution is a big part of theosophy teaching. What teaching have been given to support is the primary reason why evolution never stopped.
Mhm. So I think that maybe, and again, this is speculation, but when Blavatsky brought up the idea of evolution, she got a lot of pushback from Hindus, from Buddhists, from scholars, because they would say that the concept of evolution was not there in any spiritual tradition. And then she had to resort to allegories. She would say, well, this was never taught explicitly, but it is there in some traditions. And so she brought the idea of the avatars of Vishnu that start with a fish and then go through different animals until we get to Krishna. So she said, this is an allegory of this process of evolution. Then she would bring up this Kabbalistic idea, I think the spirit was sleeping in the mineral and then was awakening in the plant and then in the animal, this or that. So the fact that she had to resort to these allegories and the pushback that she had to defend in the theosophies, this theory, shows that this was not a known idea. Even on the physical plane evolution, the theory um, had been published by Darwin only 15 years ago, let's say, earlier. And at that time, 15 years in science was a very short time until people caught up with it. It was not the internet era like today. And the whole community of scientists was suspicious of the idea of physical evolution until maybe the turn of the century. So when Blavatsky brought up the idea of evolution, it was something not widely acknowledged. And she said, just as there is physical evolution, there is also a spiritual evolution. And then later on, she said there are three streams of evolution: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. I think the masters may have waited until Darwin published the theory of evolution on the physical plane, because otherwise this would have been just too crazy. There was nothing that HPV could have hold on to say, you see, if this happens physically, then it's not crazy to think that this happens also intellectually and spiritually. And I think that this changed the whole idea of even subjects as liberation and all of this. Because in Buddhism and Hinduism, especially at the time, later Hindus like Aurobindo took a lot of teachings from theosophy and incorporated them in Hinduism, and also some Buddhist monks did something similar with some concepts. But the normal idea in Hinduism and Buddhism, at least what you can see from the writings at the time, was not this idea of a progressive, in Buddhism, they don't believe that there is a lasting principle that can change and evolve. So the idea that something evolves and holds the evolution there was not in Buddhism. Because you have the stream of consciousness that is constantly changing. Of course, you have karma that brings some continuity, but basically, what keeps you tied to the wheel of reincarnation is desire. So if you work on yourself to uproot desire, then the reincarnations stop. And similarly with Hinduism, the tanha, the desire, the thirst is what keeps bringing you. So all your work is so that you can cut the desire and you are liberated. Now, when we introduce the idea of evolution, then we are saying the process of reincarnation has a purpose, which this is not evident in Buddhism and Hinduism, at least how it is understood or was understood normally. There is always a deeper reading in the teachings that can be different. But I think the idea of evolution changed the way we understand human life and brought this sense of there is a purpose why we are incarnated. It's not just a result of our desires, and we cannot really just try to escape it. we will stop reincarnating when the evolutionary process is accomplished. So I think that was a pivotal point, and today everybody talks about spiritual evolution in the New Age everywhere. This idea really caught on, and it changes the way in which you see life. But that again, these are all my impressions. These things can be read in different ways.
Yeah, I was curious about. Um, I think I'm curious about the timeline of where we are today. I mean, today meaning at this time, year or time or second, whatever. Uh, in relationship to what secret doctrine describes, maybe like the word or describes it, from when we started to the end. Is there any any?
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a scale per se, but just a general.
Yeah. Well, in this, and please feel free to, because all these questions, I mean, as soon as we depart from the textual thing, there are many things that have room for discussion and that we can see differently, and that is enriching to see things differently. So if any of you on any of these questions have a different take, please say so. We have some people here who have studied the secret doctrine, so I'm happy to hear a different take on things or views. So Blavatsky, when talking about time, she said, and this is something I wanted to say about what Doss said about the numbers. I think numbers were kept unexplained because they are powerful, because the masters didn't want to explain the numbers behind things. Because when we come to cycles, in the Mahatma letters, we have a couple of statements where the master says, we cannot give you the number of the cycles because if a person knew the exact numbers, they can work out a way to manipulate the human psyche, basically. And this is because the cycles are embedded in us. So Blavatsky also said, I'm not permitted to give the exact numbers, but she said the Hindu chronology is close enough. So we can use the Hindu chronology as a general, scale of time. So she agreed with that chronology. And in that chronology, the idea, well, I don't know how familiar you are with the idea of kalpas and yugas and all of this, but the idea is that the earth will hold a sentient life for about 4 billion years, let's say. We have gone through half of the evolution, more or less, up to now. So we have around 2 more billion years to go. So we are just coming off the middle of the evolution. And the way that theosophy postulates evolution is there is a descending arc where the spiritual becomes more and more material. There is the rock bottom of the process, and then there is a slow coming up to the spiritual. And we are just one cycle of evolution after the middle, the depth of this big cycle. So we are on the process of spiritualizing our nature, but just beginning. So there is a long time until the evolution on Earth finishes. Now, when we talk about these times, we are talking about the time that it takes for nature to push human beings and sentient beings along the evolutionary path. But in the case of human beings, we can greatly accelerate our own evolution so that what nature will force people to accomplish in a couple of billion years, it can be accomplished in a few thousand years, through what is called the occult path and the series of initiations and things like that. Without going into the details, and HPV herself didn't talk about this much, This last part that I mentioned, the initiations and all that, she mentions them, but she doesn't describe them. So this is later theosophical literature. But basically, those are the scales of time. So we are going to stay on Earth for 2 more root races. Then we will move on to spiritual spheres, and then we will come back to Earth. So from the 7 cycles of evolution within the Earth, we have gone through 5.5. So we have 2 more. If you think, it's hard to make calculations of the numbers, but we have been physically on Earth for 18 million years, Blavatsky says. All the remains from those times are at the bottom of the ocean because there is this change of continents. So on the continents that we have today, there are basically no remains of those early times. So we have been here for 18 million years, but we've been here in non-physical form for some more million years. So, I would say in this particular cycle of evolution, we will be on Earth for a few more million years, and then move on to other spheres, then come back to Earth, move on to other spheres, come back to Earth one last time, then move on to other spheres, and then that will be the end in the 2 billion years. So I don't know if that's enough to show, more or less, to present that. This is a cosmic picture, and the times that this takes are astronomical times.
You have tables in
Oh, there are some tables using the Hindu chronology. If you are not familiar with them, I reproduce the Hindu chronology there.
So one follow-up, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
is,
sure.
So we everybody, this human race, going through root races, right? That's what I was told. To some extent, I have to go back, start reading more theosophy. So is there any, as we go through the cycles, small cycles, like as I'm thinking about big cycle and then small cycles. So is there any guidance given from anybody to do any corrective measures, any small cycles, so that the big cycle maintains its I don't want to say expected.
Yeah. So there are several cycles. Some of them are very important. Now, Blavatsky and her teachers claimed that a very important cycle was closing in 1897 and 1898, that were the first 5,000 years since the beginning of the Kali Yuga, at the beginning of the Dark Age. And this was the first minor cycle. It seems that the Kali Yuga is divided in minor cycles of 5,000 years. The Kali Yuga as a whole lasts for about 432,000 years. 432, am I saying correctly in English? 432,000 years, yes. So we just went through 5,000 years. So we have a long time in the Kali Yuga yet. But in 1897 and 8 was the closing of the first minor cycle. And Blavatsky says, and the master said, this is a critical point that if humanity is not helped at this point, there is the danger of humanity dividing into 2 irreconcilable camps. One, the scientific, materialistic, atheistic portion of the population, rejecting any spirituality as a superstition, and then this other portion of the population that will become more and more fundamentalist, rejecting any intellectual explanation that goes against the dogma. So the master said, because of this, we decided to make this effort, creating the Theosophical Society, so that a rational view of spirituality can be offered to humanity, so that the people who have a third option, let's say, is, not only going to one or the other, but there is a third option. So that seems to be a very important cycle that was closed at that time. Then within that cycle, there were several things that were happening at that time. The 5,000 year cycle, then also the 2,000 year, the ages of Aquarius, Pisces, and all that. Blavatsky says these are real cosmic cycles, and the age of Pisces was going to end in 1900, according to her. So, within those few years, you have this 5,000 year cycle, the 2,000 year cycle. Then there is a very important 100 year cycle, which was also closing there. So around that time, was a conjunction of important cycles. Now, I ask myself, how come that the cycles end at the end of our centuries? They are 100 years cycles, which start at the beginning of a century and finish at the end of the century. But weren't the centuries established, arbitrarily? But perhaps, as we see in several instances, these ideas of when to start counting years may not be arbitrary. There may be influences there for humanity to set certain dates. Because, for example, there is in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about a cycle. They have a different calendar, and they talk about a cycle which actually coincides with this centenary cycle that Blavatsky was talking about. David Regal wrote about this in one of his articles. And the cycle that I'm talking about is Blavatsky said that at the end, the last quarter of every century, there is an acceleration of spirituality, an impulse into spirituality. And, as much as I think the New Age is superficial and misses the point and is self-centered, but the New Age has brought up to the consciousness of most people all these ideas of karma, reincarnation, evolution, energies, auras, this and that, which today they are normal, even if people don't know what they really mean. But I remember talking to older members in the society that they used to tell me, in my time, all this was just crazy stuff. People knew nothing about this. They would look bad, wrong to you if you mentioned any of this. So I think something happened in the last 25 years of the 20th century.
So you're talking about 1975 to 2000.
Yes, so from 1875 to 1900 was this new impulse on a rational spirituality through the TS, and then we saw at the end of the 20th century this popularization of subjects that were traditionally esoteric. And now you read the New York Times and they mention karma or this, obviously in a superficial way, but it entered human consciousness.
And then, do you count the 1700s, the French Revolution?
Yes. So the idea is that you could trace at the end of every 25 years of every century something that set the conditions for a new approach spiritually. And then the last cycle that I can mention, this was not by HPV. HPV didn't talk about this, but later theosophies, Bess and Leadbeater and all that, they said that in 500 years, more or less, 500 to 600 years from now on, will be the beginning of the sixth sub-race of the fifth root race. I mean, the beginning is already now, Blavatsky said. The new sub-race is already being born, mainly in California, she said, but also in other parts of the world. But this is something very slow. And Bess and Leadbeater said that in 600 years from now on, more or less, there will be a colony where the sixth sub-race is going to really launch into the world. So, again, like in all occult things, Whether you believe that or not depends on how much confidence you have in the authors. These are things we cannot know. But I would say if you trust Bess and Leadbeater, that's the time to look forward to, where humanity is going to, take a turn towards spirituality. They said at the time, theosophy will be the foundation of all religious approaches. And we have a letter from the Mahachohan, the Mahachohan letter, that says theosophy must become the cornerstone of the religions of the future. I don't think doctrinarily necessarily, I don't think that they will be teaching theosophical teachings, but I think they will be, whatever their teachings are, will have the theosophical approach, we have the theosophical spirit, we have the theosophical emphasis on, the principles that are important. So that's what I could say about the shorter cycles. I don't know if anybody else has anything that you have read or.
We just have to live another 600 years to find out.
Yeah, well, Bess and Peter were saying all those of us who are drawn into the TS, part of what we are doing, we are being trained and tested to see if we can be used in these 600 years, 700 years to help with the beginning of that colony. So, I know somebody that already volunteered out herself. Michelle says, don't call me to start anything new that is too hard. Leave me alone in Devachan. When everything is set up, then I will come and continue and help. But, maybe some of us, some of you here will be there helping out in the beginning of the new subrace in your next incarnation.
What did Blavatsky say about former and future habitation of Mars and the Moon?
HPV was not a fan of the moon. There is if you see in the TS Wiki, she says that the Earth vampirizes part of the influence of the moon, and as a revenge, the moon is flooding us with poisonous and maleficent influence on humanity. She didn't like the moon, and she said, if you are out and the moon is out, never sleep under the moon, because there are people who go crazy. And if you have to sleep under the moon, just put a white cloth on your head, because the moon is going to mess you up, psychologically. So I don't think she was looking forward. She actually says that it's not possible to live in the moon, because the moon is a dead planet. And I think that if we start a colony in the moon, probably if HPV is right, people are going to go crazy. I mean, we see that this happens when people go to space. There is a lot of psychological stuff, because what you are doing is getting out of the aura of the Earth, and our principles are made of the principles of the Earth. So if you go in space beyond the reach of the astral plane, for example, the astral plane is supposed to reach up to the moon, more or less. This is HPV. So if you go beyond that, or whenever you get, far enough, it will start messing up your astral body. And we see that, of course, we blame it on gravity. We say, well, all these problems is because there is no gravity in space. HPV was saying, no, it's not possible to live in space, or in the moon, or in Mars for that matter, because we are made of the matter of the Earth, and we need to develop in the aura of the Earth. So that's, what HPV would say.
Yeah,
We'll see.
but wasn't the moon a previous planet? So it's
So
already gone through its cycle of life.
Yeah, but I think she's talking about the NASA project of creating a colony in the moon, for example. Yes, the moon is
relevant
today,
because they're planning on colonizing and mining.
Yeah, I know.
On the moon and on Mars because of the precious metals.
I'm looking forward to that because I want to see if people go crazy or not.
Yeah, so don't sign up.
Yeah, don't sign up. If the guys from NASA tell you, hey, I can take you there, let's take somebody else first and let's see what happens. No, that will be interesting if that happens and to see if HPV was right. That, they won't be able to endure it. We'll see.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that as well. Um, as we read from the secret doctrine, we know that the moon is part of the lunar chain and not part of the Terra chain that we are in right now. So, I mean, imagine, you as a fabric of the earth, you are essentially, think of the earth as a body, your body, and then the human is essentially a single cell within the earth, right? Now you take that single cell, you isolate it from your body. Now what happened?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna die. That cell gonna die. So as long as you're part of the fabric of the earth, it's much better to be that entity, part of that entity, making up the earth, and not so much isolated yourself from it.
Yeah. She said, in these dialogues, she says there is a ring past knot around the earth as around everything that you cannot get through. You cannot get beyond that. And I think at the time people interpreted that because of the questions, and maybe HPV didn't know also how this would work. But people interpreted it as saying, so what? If we could build something, Jules Verne had this idea of going to the moon. So they were saying, if we could build something that would actually reach the moon, that would be possible. And HPV kept saying, no, there is a ring past knot that is not possible. But I think the way it works, either she knew it or not, but the ring past knot is not physical. We can pass beyond the ring, but then you cannot survive. You start declining if you are beyond the ring past knot. That's how I interpret it.
My question is not as esoteric, so pardon me for that. But I look at the three Abrahamic prophets, and Moses, God spoke to Moses through a bush. Jesus was the Son of God. And Muhammad is known as a Rasul, which means messenger. He got messages from God through the angel Gabriel. And they all three are considered prophets. So why not HPV? Why isn't she considered a prophet? Because she also got messages from the master.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, HPV would probably be yelling at you right now with you proposing that, but that's how she was. No, I think in that sense we could consider HPV as a prophet, and there have been others too. I think she would fit in that category. The only difference is just that in the theosophical tradition, we don't have that attitude of taking a personality and worshiping the personality or something like that. So HPV would be very much against considering herself in any other special way. Actually, a little story: when she was writing the Key to Theosophy, she wrote it in question and answers. So she had the inquirer who would ask a question, and then she would write the answer. She wrote both things. But the book was written by HPV, so it was obvious that the one giving the answers was HPV. And in one of the meetings that she was discussing while writing the Key to Theosophy, she was discussing with the theosophists around, and she said, I don't know what name to put to the one that answers. Somebody said, well, teacher. No, I'm not a teacher. So maybe just this or that. And somebody said, just put theosophist. And she said, no, theosophist is a too high a word because theosophist is somebody with divine wisdom. I can't put that title to myself. And people around said, HPV, if you are not a theosophist, who is a theosophist? So eventually she gave in, and you have in the Key to Theosophy inquirer, theosophist, but she was very reluctant to any personality, worship or something like that. But I think we could regard her as a prophet. And in the theosophical view, prophets are not perfect. They, as long as you are in a body, you are liable to errors, but certainly they are far wiser and far everything than we are.
But Jesus is different.
Well, Jesus is, I mean, if you take it in the Christian sense, Jesus is a divine incarnation, more like the idea of an avatar, in Hinduism, perhaps. But again, yes, you have to take how different religions consider, like Judaism considers Moses as a prophet. Islam considers Jesus as a prophet, just like Moses was, and then the prophet in Islam is the last one of a line. So yes, it depends on the context of the religion.
Wouldn't it be good to read? Would it be good to read Krishnamurti's farewell speech to everybody about that?
Which one?
His exit when he said
the one that he looked at each.
Order
Yeah.
the Scaranese
Right.
and Narden, that
Yeah.
speech.
Yeah. No, I wrote an article. My first article in the Theosophist was comparing the theosophy of HPV and the teachings of Krishnamurti. And I think they are talking about the same from these two different perspectives. And this book is the result of that connection, all the psychological application of the secret doctrine. It was always hinted to me, by my studies of Krishnamurti. I knew that HPV said, you need to do that, you, all of us, need to do that, the student. And what helped me to do that is my studies of Krishnamurti. So I think there is a complete connection, and I really appreciate his teachings. Then, his teachings, his public role was different from HPV, and that should have been clear to all theosophists, but it was not. It's easy now in hindsight to understand what happened, but Krishnamurti was not supposed to be an esoteric teacher like HPV was, because the esoteric teacher has always a limited reach. How many people are we here? Krishnamurti was supposed to be a world teacher, meaning give a philosophy that will affect masses, and not a philosophy that would be only for the few. And by that, I don't mean Krishnamurti's teachings are superficial. They are very deep and they are very esoteric. But his role was to talk about things that the masses can work with. So I really appreciate his work.
And you'll talk about that tomorrow, psychological.
Yeah, I'll talk about the psychological approach tomorrow. Anything else?
Questions?
Oh, you already asked that. Yes.
Oh.
Very well. But I would like to ask to that question. Thank you, Pablo, for a very elaborate answer on the evolution, why it did not stop. And in the book, the book did talk about that. What I see is the unlimited potentiality lie dormant and waiting to be expressed. That is, I think, is the one that's making evolution never stop, because the potentiality is unlimited.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you have it stop evolution if you have unlimited potentiality that's waiting to be expressed?
Mm-hmm. A stop of evolution. Yeah, I haven't gotten that part. So within each system there is let's say a model of perfection. That perfection is relative in the sense of within this system or within this plane, this is as good as you can get it. It's not absolute perfection, but within given these materials, the kind of matter, the kind of energy, the kind of consciousness, this is what perfection is. So evolution can end in any given cycle, like for example, the Mahatmas are supposed to have finished human evolution. There is nothing else that the human experience can add to their evolution. But then there is an evolution on higher planes that open up. So we would say within any given system, there is an end to evolution. But it is not an absolute end, because when you end the evolution in this system, a new system opens up where a new mode of evolution happens. So HPV would say, in the future, we are going to be the Barhishats and Manasaputras of the next humanity. These are technical terms. In the second volume of The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky says that there are a series of celestial beings that are guiding the physical evolution, and there is a series of celestial beings that are guiding the intellectual evolution. So those are going to be our roles after we finish the human evolution, for the evolution of a different humanity on a different planet.
Varishads being the physical.
Barhishats are the physical, Manasaputras, she used several different names, are the ones involved with the intellectual evolution. So she says the highest out of our humanity will be Manasaputras, and the rest will be Barhishats. So I suppose that those who are already Mahatmas, the adepts, they are going to be Manasaputras. If we make it, we are going to be Barhishats, which I hate it. I hate the physical plane. Don't bother me with it. But I'm sure karma will put me and say, okay, now you have to build physical forms. Okay. But anyway, so yes, there is evolution, continued evolution, but within each system there is a final goal that can be reached. What do you think about that? Do you agree or?
Yes, as the broader, you talk about in the cycle, yes, the smaller cycle, the sub-cycle of that, and nested within that cycle. Yes, they are stopped, but prepare itself for a bigger cycle. But my question is not in any of those cycles as a whole, totality, evolution that never stop because of the infinite. It keeps going, potentiality. So you cannot have a stopping point when you have, infinite.
No, the stopping point is temporary when everything goes back to the absolute. Then there is no evolution during the period of pralaya, although
resting. Yes.
There is resting. There may be some idea there that there is some kind of growth, but anyway, theoretically there is no evolution there. But the new cosmos will continue to keep on evolving on higher planes. So yes, evolution will continue forever.
Yes, thank you.
Das, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to say that while we talk about evolution, the scientific community talks about evolution, but it's really not exactly the same thing. They're largely concerned with where the bodies came from, and their story of where the bodies came from is a totally different version from what the husband says.
Mm-hmm.
We're more concerned with the spiritual evolution, and that's a whole different. And another thing, we think that there's sort of a purpose in the going from better and better and higher, and in the physical ordinary evolution thing, that's not really particularly. It's just random mutations and survival of the fittest. So if we don't make it, cockroaches probably will, and that's just fine. I'm just saying it's a very different worldview. What we say and what they say, just because we use the evolution thing, and also just because we talk about enormous periods of time, doesn't really mean that we're on the same. Like you were talking about the cycles. The scientists are very, very sure that 13.8 billion years ago is when the whole universe started, Big Bang. And the theosophical number is like, 300 trillion or something. I mean, it's
311 trillion.
It's like things don't just seem to fit on the same page. So there's just a lot of things that we might say in theosophy that the scientists would still say is just completely crazy. But yet we have, that's what we say.
Yeah. Although now the scientists are scratching their heads because with the new telescope, they are seeing that the galaxies that they thought were going to be very simple because they are seeing deep, close to the Big Bang, and they find all these already formed galaxies there. So, it seems that these 13 billion years is not enough at all for the cosmos. Now, also something interesting that the electric universe people say is that the whole way that science measures time is flawed because they measure distances which can be translated into time because of the time that the light took to get to us by what they call the Doppler effect. They see that when the light is moving toward you, it becomes bluer. When it goes away from you, it becomes redder. So the photons is what you use to see how far some photon is from you. But the electric universe people say that when the photons are traveling through space, the interaction with the electromagnetism of space makes them lose energy and therefore becoming redder, so that everything, because science is not considering the magnetic fields that are in space, they are not taking this into consideration. So when we see a photon that is red, it's not that it's as far as they think it is. It's that it is losing energy because of these electromagnetic fields. So the whole measurement, according to electric universe people, the whole measurement of time and distance is messed up in science. So that also will be interesting to see now that science is beginning to be able to measure electric fields in the universe and magnetic. We'll see if they discover that.
Well, they are trying to see some evidence of something. Well, I don't know if there's a parallel to this, but they're saying the birds and the electron hit their eyes, and the electromagnetic fields that they sense, they interact with both of them to navigate with the entangled, the entangled spin of the photons also play a role. So do the birds know better than me?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. No, there are so many mysteries. HPV says that the fish that can dive so fast into the ocean, she says they are not doing this by just by using their muscles. The fish know how to manipulate gravity so that they can dive faster. And Blavatsky herself knew how to manipulate the gravity. She says this is not a big secret, although it's a secret, but it's not all that difficult. And there is a story when she came back from her trips to her home in Russia, now Ukraine. One of the brothers didn't believe anything that she was saying. You know, she said, "Yes, I met these people. They trained me." So there is this cute story that there was a small table, coffee table. So HPV told the brother, "Okay, no." First told the dad. I think I may be missing some details, but this was the gist. Lift that table, and the dad lifted it. He was older. And then she told her brother, and now you lift it. And he tried to lift it, and he couldn't. And he couldn't. And then he was training so much that he broke the table and could not lift it. And there were witnesses there. I think her niece or her sister wrote about this. So there is a possibility of altering gravity that is apparently possible, not all that difficult. And the fish know how to do it, just like the birds know how to read the magnetic field of the earth. And those are possible faculties in us. It's just that we have not developed them yet.
But take with the table, similar to Moses turning his walking stick into a snake.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
further makes my point.
Yeah, or opening the Red Sea or whatever that he went through. All these things are possible if the person has developed, these so-called faculties. For most people, these things are just fantasy, but HPV, they demonstrate in front of witnesses this many times. In India, she would invite people from the government, not theosophists, people from the government, and she would do these demonstrations, and people there were convinced. Of course, people who did not witness the demonstrations always said, well, there was some trick, you were fooled, it was not probably quite like that. But for those who were there, It was undeniable.
Any other questions? Oh, everybody's sleepy now.
Yeah. Knowing everything about the secret doctrine.
Oh. Okay, I think that's it for tonight.
Right, thank you.
So we meet again tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
Sure, I'll do it.